So my name is Reinge. I'm a sports therapist. I'm also a sports scientist, and I'm a clinical exercise physiologist, which sounds very grand. And my husband and I both run the Reinge clinic in Kenilworth. And so, you know, running injuries is one of the main things that we deal with. So we wanted to try and help Waverley Day Centre through this, who are a fantastic charity and are really, really struggling. So thanks to your coming on this, we've managed to get £100 that we'll be able to give them, which I think is absolutely wonderful. So I hope that you enjoy it. We're going to start by talking about different types of foot strike when you run. That's the very first thing we're going to talk about. And then we're going to have a little chat about forces that run through the body. So when you run, obviously there's a lot of force that goes through your body, and the body has to deal with that force. And depending how you strike the floor, depends how your body will deal with that. We're then going to look at the injury implications. So again, depending how you strike the floor, depending how your body deals with those forces, will depend what sort of injuries you are likely to get. And I'm going to finish by talking about foot strengthening, which is absolutely essential in runners. Then I'm going to hand over to Ian. So we'll just have a little 2-minute pause. You can grab yourselves a drink of water. And Ian's going to have a look at under and over pronation, which are two things that come up in running all the time. I'm going to explain what they are so that you understand. And again, talk about injuries that can occur if you under or over pronate. We're going to have a look at shoe tread. And we're going to show you how to analyse your own shoes so that you can see how you run. Do you underpronate? Do you overpronate? Do you strike with your heel? Do you strike on your toes? You can see all this through your shoes. So we're going to show you in a really simple way how to do that. And then Ian's going to talk to you about how to change that gait. So if it's not correct, we're going to try and change it. And then there's questions available for you at the end. So let's get into it. So we're going to talk today about two main foot strikes, your heel strike and your midfoot strike. Now, some people do land with a forefoot. And in all honesty, unless you are a sprinter, you don't really want to land on your forefoot, okay? So if you're doing 5K, if you're jogging around the streets just to stay fit at the moment, or if you're, you know, all the way up the spectrum and you're an ultra marathon runner, you don't want to be on your toes. That's very bad for you and will give you a lot of injuries. So we're going to look at heel strikes, which are, I would say, one of the most common strikes we see. Now, if you go back in time, heel striking wasn't really something that ever happened in running. If you're back in the 70s and 80s, you didn't see a lot of heel striking. It was down in the 90s when someone from Nike felt that if you had a long stride, if you overstrode, you would be able to run faster. That was their theory. So they encouraged everyone to kind of stride out when they ran, really kind of long legs in front of you. The problem with that was that people started to get injured. And they got injured because if you stride out, if you overstride, you land on your heel. So in order to get around that, they created a shoe. And this shoe had quite a lot of padding in the heel. And the whole point was that it would help that heel. The force as your heel lands on the floor is quite hard. And the heel just doesn't like it. So the shoes were created to try and absorb that force. And those shoes have kind of developed over the years. And that cushioning has got thicker and thicker and thicker. And similarly now, we've got some really interesting shoes coming out of France with springs on them. And we've got some really complicated shoes that are effectively trying to put an arch into your heel. They cost an absolute fortune. They're fascinating. I'd love to try one out. I think that'd be really interesting. But ultimately, your foot has an arch in it. It has everything that it needs to dissipate a force. So, you know, it's up to you, but I would consider it may not be the best use of your money. So the other thing we're going to look at is the midfoot stride. And the midfoot stride, now I've put it there as a barefoot runner, but you don't have to barefoot run in order to midfoot stride. It's absolutely not necessary. You can do it in shoes. It's absolutely fine. And by midfoot, what I mean is that the heel of your foot and the ball of your foot land at the same time. So people get a bit confused with this, and in their desperation to get off their heel, they end up on a toe strike. And it's not about your heel never touching the floor. It's about the heel and the ball of your foot landing at the same time. So it's interesting that, you know, the midfoot strike has become kind of a modern fad, I guess, in a way, and that came about with the Vibram's 5-finger product. I don't know if you're aware of that one, but it's the shoes that have the toes in, and we'll talk about them later. And this kind of became like a running fad, but it's not a fad. If you think about it, you know, before shoes were invented, we ran a lot. You know, our natural foot is designed to run. The other thing to mention is, if you get a moment later, head out into your garden or into your street without any shoes on and try and do a heel strike without any shoes on. If you run without shoes on and heel strike, it's going to feel incredibly uncomfortable. It's going to feel incredibly inefficient, and it'll probably hurt. So you'll probably only do it once, but do it to feel how it feels. And then you can really see what the shoe is doing for you when you're running. Let's move on and talk a little bit about physics. Now, don't panic and run away. This is going to be super simple. So something called Newton's third law is quite important in running. And what it states is that for every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. And what that is basically saying is that if I hit the floor with 1 kilogram of downwards force into the ground will react and give me an upward force of the same amount of 1 kilogram. So it is opposite and it is equal. So if I think of running, I'm going to land with quite a lot of my body weight. So you kind of think in your head what your body weight is. That body weight is coming down into the ground every time you strike the floor, and the floor is giving you a reaction, a force back up at you. And this is useful. It lets us run. We couldn't run without ground reaction forces. We need something to push off in order to give us movement, to give us forward momentum. But because it's equal and opposite, if we hit the floor kind of in this direction, the force coming back at us will be in this direction. If I hit the floor in this direction, the force will be in this direction. So just keep that in your head and it'll come back as we go on through. It's important for efficiency of running. So these are 2 force diagrams, and don't panic, they're ground reaction force diagrams. They're really very simple when you get your head around them. This is a heel strike force reaction diagram, and this is a midfoot strike force reaction diagram. So along the bottom here, we've got our time in milliseconds. So this is the moment your foot starts to hit the floor to the moment your toe leaves the floor. And this is your time in milliseconds. Now, this is why in the clinic, if we analyze anybody's gait, we slow them down, we video them and we slow them down, because 300 milliseconds is no time at all to see what's going on in the body. If I'm just using my eyes and watching you run, I'm going to miss a whole load of stuff. So we video you and we slow it down so we can see exactly what's happening when your foot hits the floor. And up this side, we've got our ground reaction force. We've got the force that the ground is giving back. And this is body weight. So you've got 1 times your body weight, 2 times your body weight. So let's say you are, 80 kilograms, something like that. Then at the most force you're going to get is 2.5 times your body weight. So that's about 200 kilograms. So if you think back to the gym when you're lifting weights, and that weight, 200 kilograms, is an awful lot of force, and your body has to deal with this force. And this is why you can get injuries when you run, because your body may not be dealing with that force correctly. So if we go back to this heel strike, we've got here something called an impact peak. So the force rises to a point, and this point is the point at which your heel hits the floor. As your foot goes from a heel strike over into a midfoot strike before you toe off, you slightly lose some of that force. So big strike, some of that force disappears, and then it rises again to where you've got the whole base of the full weight of your foot, of your body down onto the floor. And usually you're in a midfoot position by this point. And then as you toe off, it kind of disappears. If we compare that here to the midfoot strike, we get actually a lovely, what we call a linear curve. So this means that the forces are building really slowly, really gently in a way. The body can absorb stuff that comes nice and slowly. It can deal with that. It comes gently up to a peak really, and then it dissipates. And if you actually look at the force is absolutely no different whether you heel strike or you midfoot strike. The same amount of force is running through your body. It has to, it's physics. You can't change your mass. So the amount of force you create doesn't change. However, the faster you run, the more force you create. So, you know, if you are starting out and you're trying to get your body used to these forces, or you're maybe coming back from an injury, a really good tip is to slow your run right down, because if you slow it down, you put slightly less force through. So if you run quite quickly, you can put up to 6 times your body weight through your body, and that is an awful lot of force. The slower you go, you're going to be putting more like 2.5, 3 times your body weight. So the other thing to note is that here we've got our heel strike. So the body is basically getting a shock. As you hit the floor, you're getting this shock wave running through your body that your body has to deal with in a way you're not getting it here. The other thing you're doing is as you rise up to this peak, the force then kind of drops off, and then, oh, you have to give it a bit more force to get yourself going again. So from an efficiency perspective, this is more efficient than this. We shall continue with that thought. Hopefully you're all still with me. So let's look at a bit of basic foot anatomy. In our foot, we have 3 main sections. We've got our forefoot, which really is your toes, and these, which are called your metatarsals, a bit like the footballers are always damaging when they stamp on each other. We've got our midfoot here, and then we've got our hind foot, which is really made up of mostly one bone, being your heel bone, or your calcaneus for any actual trainers or therapists out there. So let's have a look at our forefoot. What is our forefoot doing when we run? Because it's involved, the whole of the foot is involved. It's a clever structure. So here we've got all our bones. We've got 19 bones. These are all our toes here. And this is our metatarsals here. There are 19 bones in that, and there are 14 joints. That is a lot of bones and a lot of joints. And why on earth do we have them all? Well, it's so that we can flex. It's so our foot will move. And by moving and by flexing, we dissipate forces. Now, the important thing about toes is when you land, your toes should splay out. Now, it splays out for 2 reasons. Firstly, to help you with balance, and secondly, again, to help dissipate those forces. So if we look at these shoes, these are those Vibram 5-finger shoes you may have heard of. You may love them, you may hate them. Everyone has a view on these shoes. But if we park those thoughts for a moment, the fact that they actually have toes means your toes can move. They can splay, they can move in a natural way. And actually, do you know what? That's quite clever, because even if we look at some of these other minimalistic shoes, we've got the Merrell here, but the shoe is enclosed in the Merrell, the toes are enclosed in the Merrell. So actually, although we are more likely to do a midfoot strike in a Merrell or even in the Vibrams, our toes actually can't move in a natural way. And often people will go and try them out and they absolutely love these toes in the end. They think, oh, they're weird, but actually they feel very comfortable because your foot can splay, can move exactly as it's designed to do. If we move on to the midfoot, this is where the clever stuff really starts to happen. So this is our midfoot here, and it's made up of these kind of 5 bones. So they're called irregular bones, and you can see they have a very odd shape, but they are there for mostly one reason, and that is to give you an arch in your foot. And the arch is essential to running, to healthy running, to not damaging yourself. So we've got 2, well, actually we've got 3 arches in the foot, but we've got 2 that we're interested in today. And this one here is our lateral arch. So lateral just means outside of the foot. And this green one here is a medial arch, and that's the inside of your foot. And this is why your foot lifts up on the inside and doesn't lift up on the outside, because this arch is considerably higher than this one. Now, this is important because when we land on our foot with all that body weight through our bodies, this arch drops, it flattens off. Now, if you haven't got an arch, so if you're one of these people who have very flat feet, then you start in a flat position. All that force is still going to go through your body. So when you hit the floor, you're going to go into what we call an over-pronation. So pronation in running is something most of us will have heard about. We have shoes for it. We have all sorts of things for it. Pronation in running is normal, is natural, and we need it. Okay, we cannot stop the foot pronating. You will pronate when you walk, and you will pronate when you run, and you need to. It's really important. What we don't want to do is over pronate. That's where we get into problems. So if you have an arch, if you have a nice arch, so your foot is off the floor on the inside compared to the outside, and you can check this just by standing on the floor barefoot and have a little look. Have you got a bit of a gap from the floor? And if you have, then you have an arch. And when you land, when you run, that arch will flatten off and dissipate forces. All these joints will move and the arch will flatten. Now we've also got something else at the base of our foot that's really useful, and it's a ligament, and it runs from the heel to the ball of the foot. And so this is our arch that I was explaining earlier, and this is it flattening. This is it flattening at the end. So this ligament is very cool. It's a bit like an elastic band. As you land on the floor, the elastic band stretches, okay? And that is creating potential energy. There's a load of energy stored in this band that's now taut. As my foot lifts off the floor, it'll recoil and it will give you a load of upwards force. So as you land, it flattens out, it stretches, and as you lift your foot, it relaxes and it recoils. And therefore it allows you a really efficient run, because you're getting a whole load of force from inside the foot. You don't have to try and do it. Your muscles aren't involved. This is pure physics working for you. So this is one of the reasons we like a mid-foot landing when you're running, because this can flatten and you will get an upward spring as you lift. Now, if you're moving forward, momentum is taking you forward, you'll get upward spring and forward movement with no effort whatsoever. Who wouldn't like that? That sounds great to me. So the midfoot, the whole point of the midfoot of the body is for force dissipation. You dissipate force through the bones of your foot. They move, they twist, they create a flattening of the arch. The joints of the foot allow force to dissipate. The arches of the foot flatten and get rid of that force, and the ligaments of the foot flatten and give you all this upward momentum. So the midfoot is amazing. It's absolutely what we need when we run. Let's go back and look at that foot strike again, and back to our heel strike, foot strike. If we land with our foot in front of us, so here is our body, so this would be our other leg here, and here is our foot, so it's landing in front of us, and so we are heel striking. If your foot lands in front of you, you have to heel strike. You have no choice in the matter. Now, we talked before about Newton's third law and those forces. So if we heel strike, the force going down into the floor is coming in this direction, which means the force coming back is coming back up at us in this direction. It's almost slowing you down. It's kind of creating a force pushing on you. That's not very helpful. But as we flatten off and we go into our toe off part of our gait, our driving force here is now in this direction. So our ground is giving us a force in a forward direction, which is almost like you're being given a shove from behind. So with our heel strike, we're kind of being slowed down and then given a shove. And if we go back to that force diagram we looked at earlier, that's not efficient. That is not efficient. I don't want to have to be slowed down, overcome that and push myself back off. I want to use the force that the ground's giving me to give me forward momentum. That's far more efficient when I run. If I look at the midfoot strike now, there's my foot, which should be landing pretty much directly underneath my body. So I should have my hips directly underneath my feet when I land. And if I do that, the forces will go straight down into the floor. Therefore, the force that comes back up at me will be coming straight back into the air. So it's giving me an upward force, which is what I want, because again, momentum is moving me forward. I've now got all this upward force. I've got my ligament giving me some internal, intrinsic upward force, and I've got the ground. I've got physics giving me a load of upwards force. And this is why the midfoot strike is such an efficient running style, and it is efficient. It's hugely efficient. Forget kind of, I know people will read about things like VO2 max and efficiency of the lungs. This is slightly different efficiency, okay? Your body will always adapt, so it's very hard to test that. But if you actually look at how much effort your body has to put into flattening and recoiling and getting you from A to B, if you use your body's internal structures, you will actually find that running becomes really easy. And this is what people say. They're like, oh my gosh, it's effortless. And effortless is what you want running to be, especially if you're running long distances, especially if you're new to running. So let's take a, excuse me, a quick look at heel strike again, but from an injury perspective this time. As you can tell, I'm not a big fan of the heel strike. Everybody pretty much, we try and move away from a heel strike. There are very, very few situations where you want somebody running with a heel strike. So Let's have a little look here. When I land, I am landing with my heel. So this is my heel bone. Now around my heel bone, I've got a fatty pad that's designed to kind of protect this bone. I've got bursas that are a little kind of fluid-filled sacs. They stop your muscle rubbing on bone as it goes round. Now, if you hit this with enough force, you can upset that fatty pad, and you can certainly upset that bursa. In fact, in some cases, you can rupture that bursa, which can be very nasty. You can also irritate the muscles that attach and run around here, and they end up forming your plantar fascia. So plantar fasciitis can be a problem. Achilles issues can be a problem. The point is that when we run, if we look at the fact we've got, what, 3-4 times your body weight, 200 odd kilograms running through that bone is not ideal. So your body is going to dissipate that force, as we've explained. So it's going to do it through the joints of the body. And in the heel strike, we have one joint here, we have one joint here, and we have one joint here. So we've got 3 joints to dissipate that force. And then it's out of the foot, it's moved on from the foot. There's nothing else in the foot that can assist it, because really that's where we've hit, that's our main force. So what's going to start to happen is it's going to travel up through the body, and we're going to get, so there's a bones here, let me get my little leg. So you've got these 2 bones in your leg, I hope you can see that, and these are designed to flex, they're designed to flex and move, but muscles attach down here and muscles attach down here, and if you're doing this all the time, they're going to get irritated, and this is how you get shin splints. Now, shin splints are very, very much an injury associated with a heel strike, because this is moving, it's irritating where the muscle attaches onto the bone, and you get little microtrauma, you get little damage to that, and that is not good over the long term, especially if you're maybe an ultra runner or a marathon runner that's doing that for 26, 40 odd miles. That is not ideal. So it will dissipate some of that force. So we've got 1, 2, 3 joints. We'll give that another joint. That's 4 joints. And we're now into the knee. Now, this is problematic. Many, many knee problems with runners. They come for many reasons. They come because that arch is not strong. That's one of the reasons. So when you go from that, what should be from a kind of normal arch position to a flat foot, the knee is fine. The knee likes that. If you start flat and you go into what we call an overpronation, so your foot drops in, what will happen is your knee will also drop in. This bit will drop forwards down this way, and that creates a rubbing on these joints here that irritates your patella, your kneecap. It starts to shift the kneecap in a position you don't necessarily want it. So you can get osteoarthritis issues, you can get all sorts of problems with the knee because of the way your foot is hitting the floor. But we've still only got 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I'll give the patella 1, 6. I've only got to 6 joints and I'm up in the knee. I can get to 7 joints in the hip. Lots of hip problems again with running. Many people get hip problems with running, stability issues with running. And again, it's those forces tracking up through the body. They just shouldn't be there. Then we're into the pelvis, which does have, it is a movable structure, the pelvis. So we'll give that a couple of joints. And then we're into the spine. So, within 9 or 10 joints, we're into the spine and we're dissipating. Then that force will go through the spine. There's loads of joints, there's loads of mechanisms to get rid of force through the spine. But I don't know about you, I would rather not have, 200, 300 kilograms running through my spine. I don't think that's a great idea. And again, we see a lot of back problems that can come from running. Let's take a look at the midfoot. The lovely midfoot, all designed to dissipate forces. So now, instead of our heel strike, we now have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Let me put them over here, actually, it's easy to see. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 joints. And we haven't even left the foot yet. By 10 joints, we were up in the spine with a heel strike. With the midfoot, we haven't even left the foot. And we've got 13 joints to dissipate that force. We've got 13 joints, an arch, the foot helping us, the ligament, the plantar ligament flattening. It makes so much more sense for running to try and use this midfoot strike. So The midfoot running style is the one we would really suggest you try and get into for all the reasons we've outlined in the last kind of 25 minutes. It is more efficient. It uses natural shock absorption, so you don't have to worry about your shoe, and you're going to have a much lower injury risk. However, there is a big caveat to that, and that is that the muscles of the foot need to be strong enough or they won't support it. Okay, so the arch of your foot is supported by muscles. If you have flat feet, the muscles are not doing their job properly. So we need to do some foot strengthening. Here are all these little muscles in your foot. Can you see them? There's loads of them. And their job is to create an arch, along with ligaments, along with bigger muscles around. But deep, deep inside your foot are all these little muscles that create an arch. Now, what you will find is that you will go into maybe a running shop and they will look at you run, they will look at your foot and your ankle, and they will go, oh, you pronate, so you drop in. We'll give you overpronation shoes. And what they have in them is an arch support, effectively. So they're kind of artificially giving you your arch back. Now, there's a problem with that. If we don't use a muscle will stop working. It's as simple as that. If I put your arm in a plaster cast and left it there for 6 weeks, so you couldn't move your wrist, by the time it came out, you'd have virtually no muscle in that arm. You'd have to build it back up again. And the foot is absolutely no different. If we don't use these muscles, they're not going to work. They're going to get weaker and weaker. And what you find is that people who have had, you know, pronation control shoes, or they've got kind of orthotics in their shoes, or they've got arch supports in their shoes, over time, those arch supports become actually useless. You know, they get less and less effective because ultimately the muscles are now doing nothing, whereas maybe they were doing something at the start. So you can't support this forever. What you need to do is start to strengthen. Okay, so anyone who's got a flat arch and has been told there is nothing you can do about it, there is loads you can do about it. You can strengthen a muscle, and the arch is supported by the muscles of the foot. So how are we going to strengthen up those feet? Dead easy. We're going to use a towel and we're going to scrunch that towel up. Now I'm going to try and do something very clever with technology now. So bear with me a moment and I'm going to swap you over to my iPad. Right, hopefully you can now all see this screen. So this is our exercise. This is what we're going to do. We're going to take our foot and we've got a towel on the floor. So what I've got here, if I've got my heel is on the floor and my toes are on the towel, okay? And what I'm going to do is put my foot down and start to scrunch my towel up, like so. Now, that looks pretty easy, doesn't it, really? You'd be surprised how tricky that is. If you don't have an arch, this is really quite hard to do. I'm doing it on carpet here. If you don't have an arch, don't start it on carpet. Do it on tiled floors or, sorry, one moment, hello. I've just let them in, don't worry. Sorry, I know someone was waiting to come in. Ian's just let me know. How exciting. Right, so anyway, yes, so your heel should be on the floor and your toes should be on the towel. And if you have no arch, don't do it on carpet. Carpet is friction. Friction of towel upon towel makes it tricky to do. Do it on maybe a bathroom floor, on a kitchen floor, something with tiles, or something with maybe laminate flooring. That's a good place to start. Okay, do it so you can access it. Now what I want to show you on here on my lovely foot, if you look at me doing this, many of you will have this issue, I am sure. Can you see my toe there? So my toe is twisting across. It's not sat in a correct anatomical position. Now if you have weakness in your foot, you may have a big toe that's starting to come across. This is really common. What happens when your foot gets weak? Let me try and show you on Sid. When your foot gets weak, okay, as your arch collapses, it puts a lot of stress on a ligament that runs across here. And over time, that ligament gets stretched and it damages it, and your toe comes across. Now, the way to fix this, and you can fix it, it takes some time, okay, but if you kind of persevere, you can get there, is to get the arch of that foot back to offload that joint. That's how you do it, and this is a really good way of doing it. Now, the problem is, if I do this exercise with my toe in this position, I am strengthening my toe in the wrong place. I don't want to strengthen my toe in the wrong place. I don't want to encourage my toe to stay in a place that's wrong. So what we're going to do is in this video, hopefully you can see in here, I have got this, which is a toe separator. It's a bunion toe separator. You can buy them from Amazon. They're a few pounds. They're really not much at all. But what they do, they're a bit of plastic. If you paint your toenails, sometimes those toenail separators, similar thing, do exactly the same thing. If you're a push, you could use some loo roll and shove it between your toes. You do tend to squash it a bit, so plastic is better, or silicone, as these are. But basically put that between your toes, because what you will find now, if I come back out so it's a bit more in focus, is when I do my towel scrunch, now I'm working my big toe in its normal position, in as good as I can get. If you've got a very extreme toe that's coming across, you might only get a little bit back, but every little notch you get back is good. You don't want to form a bunion, and bunion's what forms here. That can get quite sore. And once the toe stops moving, it's actually really tricky to stop that. Once you've got no movement back, you're kind of going to struggle to get it back. But if you do have the ability to move that toe, then you can retrain it back to where you want it to go. So then, there we go. Right, so then if I try and do my tail scrunching exercise, it's actually harder for me. This is actually my weak foot, funnily enough. It is the one that I pronate on. Suddenly it becomes harder, because now I've got to use my foot. I can't twist my foot. I'm using the muscles of my foot. And this is what we want to do to get that arch back. And you will get that arch back. We see it every day in the clinic. It might take a month or two, but it will come back. And then you will feel much happier in your running. Let me just stop that share. So that is one really easy way to strengthen those feet. I'm just going to show you another one, actually, rather than pausing. Because there's a second exercise that I think is, again, really simple, but a really, really good way of strengthening up the arch of that foot. So, okay, and that is one of these little devices. These are really cool. I'll just go right back. These are really cool. These are called stability discs. Again, they're not expensive. You can pick one up from Amazon for about 12 or 15 pounds. And what they are is a little air sac, fundamentally, and it's got two sides to it. It's got a bobbly side and it's got a smooth side. The bobbly side is the one you tend to start with. It's designed to be bobbly to get your nerve endings firing up a little bit more, and then when you're really good at it, you use the smooth side, and that's supposed to be harder. It is a bit harder, I would have to say, but that's the theory behind the bobbles and the smoothness. So as you step onto it, what we're having to do is balance. I want to step onto it and I want my foot to balance. Now, it's tricky to do. And what I hope you can see is my foot, not just my ankle, but my whole foot is working quite hard. Let me try and make it a bit bigger. Can you see it kind of twisting and flexing around all these little bones in here? It's having to work pretty hard to stabilize me. Now, this is different to a wobble board or a rocker board. Okay, so wobble boards, because they're fixed, they're just designed to rehab your ankle. Okay, so if you go over on your ankle a lot, which actually comes into pronation and overpronation anyway, so Ian might touch on that later. If you go over on your ankle a lot, then fine, use a wobble board or a rocker board. If you have a weak foot, because that is a fixed surface, the foot isn't really doing anything. It's all coming from ankle movement. If I want that foot to twist and rotate and all the little bones to have to move and the arch to have to be supported, I need the foot to move. And because this is full of air, this allows that foot to twist and move, and therefore you will strengthen the little muscles. And it's super easy to do. It's super cheap to achieve. And if you do that for a few weeks alongside some towel scrunching, you will start to see a nice arch appear, which is just what we want to see. Okay, I'm going to go and grab Ian, who is going to come and do the next bit for you. So just have a little chat amongst yourselves for a couple of minutes and he will be back.
Okay. Fantastic. Right, everybody. We're going to take a little look at neutral, foot placement, overpronation, underpronation, what it's all about, what some of the arguments are, and then we're going to look at how you can assess in yourself and your friends and your fellow runners if they're suffering from any of these things, largely by looking at how to use the shoes to show you that. So the picture we've got here in the middle is a neutral foot placement. If you're seeing this in a shoe, if you're at a shop and they were doing an ankle foot relationship, which is what they will do to fit a shoe, the calf, the Achilles, the tibia, if you can imagine where it is, would be in line with the heel exactly as my cursor is waving in the middle. And that's the way ideally we want things to work. But for a lot of people, we see the one on the left. We get this overpronation where the foot tips in excessively. And that comes with all sorts of effects, which are unpleasant, which we'll look at in a minute. And on the outside, a little bit rarer, and for a couple of other reasons, you can get supination or underpronation where the foot goes onto the outside edge. And that comes with its own problems as well. Now, anybody out of all the people here who does research or is a scientist or whatever will understand the limitations of research papers and the problems that can come up, and the fact that they are often driven by a personal desire to find something rather than being neutral. There's an awful lot of talk all the time about, does overpronation matter? Does underpronation matter? And a lot of people say it doesn't, it's irrelevant. If you overpronate, so what? Some confusion does occur. A degree of pronation is normal. It's how our foot works. We're going to talk about that. But overpronation has a knock-on effect through the joints and further up the body. One of the problems with research is there's not a lot of longitudinal research out there. Most research projects work over several months, not several years. So if you're trying to assess, do people get an injury through overpronating or underpronating, you won't find that out in a few months. So these will cause problems. There are people running out there who have these issues, and they do get away with it, and they get away with it, honestly, sometimes for 30, 40, 50 years, depending how well their body compensates. But ultimately, they end up through our door, and they end up with a whole load of problems that almost kill their running career. So let's have a look at how you can recognize it and what you can do to correct it, or at the very least be aware that it is there. So this is the common one, overpronation. This is the foot tipping in. And when the foot tips in, it takes the whole of the leg into an internal rotation. So it would make your knee, instead of pointing forward, your kneecap would start to point inwards. And you can't run like that because that's going to hurt. So what will happen is the deep muscles of the hips are the next thing that can actually physically rotate your entire leg. They shouldn't have to. The amount of rotation that occurs in your leg when you run should be contained within your foot and controlled by everything Gina has talked about, how the foot supports itself. And those mechanisms will be in play, whether you heel strike, midfoot strike, or forefoot strike. You will still have the stabilizing mechanisms available in the foot, just possibly in a slightly odd order. So what will happen with overpronation is you will start to get some of the classic things you'll have heard of: piriformis syndrome, runner's knee, IT band syndrome. And these are all where the hips, the glutes, if you prefer, are working overtime, trying to externally rotate the leg because gravity in your foot is driving it in. So that in itself is not good. But if you look at that picture on the left as well, you can kind of see what that would do to the bones. Instead of this nice joint where the compartment on the inside and outside at the end of the condyles, at the end of the bone there, instead of equal compartments, one is closed up and one is stretched open. And I don't know if Gina talks about this, but on the outside, this would stretch and stress all these ligaments. And that doesn't help if they are already injured from having turned an ankle, but it will also cause pain full stop. These bony surfaces will also rub together as well, create more friction than is normal. So we start to get arthritis over time in the ankle. And what you can't see here, when you go over on the inside, your big toe gets pushed across. And this is where bunions often start to come from. Someone, even if they're walking, if they overpronate when they run, they'll overpronate when they walk, and vice versa. Your big toe gets pushed across, and the knuckle, if you like, the first joint of the toe on the foot, is now presented sticking outwards slightly to the side of a shoe, and it rubs and rubs and rubs and calluses and can become calcified, and you get a bunion. So if nothing else, you can look at your own feet, and if you have a big toe that is pushing across into the second toe, and if you look at both feet and one is worse than the other, then already, without checking anything else, you overpronate. All our toes should face forward in a straight line. All our toes should have a fairly equal distance between them. So in a nutshell, that's overpronation. It is not pleasant, and I would, 30 years I've been doing this, I would challenge anybody who's done research that tells me overpronation doesn't cause injury to prove that to me, and not to prove it with a 3-month study, to prove it to me over a decent longitudinal study of a few years. And it's not going to happen, apart from children of the 90s, which didn't cover this kind of thing. So there's always going to be arguments. We can only go with the mechanics. We can only go with how the body is designed, that it's supposed to have certain spaces, certain muscle balance, certain positions of joints. That's why joints are the shapes they are. And overpronation does not keep the joints in the pressures and shapes they are. So this is rarer. This is somebody who stays on the outside edge of their foot. With this comes all sorts of issues. Now, people like me, and I haven't run a lot since we had our lad, but I actually used to be an ultra runner and mountain marathons and everything else. I'm one of the few people in the world who underpronate because of the shape of my legs. And it's what most of us would call bow-legged. You don't see it much anymore. But people who've got what's called tibial varum have got a kind of bow-legged look going on. The angle of our shins, the angle of our tibia, it just pushes us onto the outside edge of the foot. And there's not a lot we can do about it, apart from get a nice wide shoe that offers support on the outside edge. But what happens with this is we get a lot of tightness all down the outside edge of the leg. So down through the outside of the calf, we can get compartment syndromes from this. We will get IT band syndrome again. But the one, you can see the picture on the, I'm trying to point, you can try to see the picture on the right. This creates an outward rotation of the leg. So we will be trying with the hip to now rotate in. And we'll be trying to use the adductors to twist in. So we're actually more likely to do a groin strain or something unpleasant, especially if we're running off-road and our foot slips a little bit, pushing up a hill. So if you find you're subject to groin strains or even groin pain when you run, this could well be your problem. It has the opposite effect of what we saw in the overpronation. The outside edge of the foot is now all compressed together, and the inside edge, the ligaments are all stretched and tight. We'll keep pointing the wrong way around because it's back to front. This is the outside edge. The biggest problem with this is you will keep going over. You'll keep spraining your ankle in the traditional pattern. And I'm classic for this. I did not even know that I underpronated. About 15% of the population underpronate naturally. I spent my entire time at school turning my ankles, just walking along. I'd be walking to school and all of a sudden I'd be on the floor going, God, what did I do? It certainly wasn't until I started to do this for work that it became apparent that that was my issue. I had to strengthen and strengthen and strengthen my foot and my lower leg and my ankle to be able to handle this, to stop me constantly going over. But all the wear on my shoes, which we'll look at, is down the outside edge, and the shoe is always destroyed where my little toe is. The whole upper bulges out to one side and it falls over the sole. So I go through shoes like mad. There is another reason you could underpronate if it's not natural. Someone who is really weak in the foot, which I know Jean has described, will sometimes underpronate subconsciously without realizing. When they place their foot on the floor and the brain is aware, the central nervous system is aware that the foot is going to go in, and this isn't pleasant, it will actually try to put them on the outside edge of their foot. And we find a lot of people, they are overpronators, but they have overcompensated and now they underpronate. But that would all come from checking the strength in the feet and seeing if the arches are present, which I think Jean has talked about. Wave if Jean has talked about that, Rebecca. Did Gina talk about strengthening in the foot? Checking if the foot was weak? Yeah, good. So 2 reasons for underpronation. One, like me, is natural, and you'll see these bandy legs. The other is actually the person is very weak in the sole of the foot and they have to run down the outside edge. And that gives real problems because the 5th metatarsal will take all the pressure and you'll get little stress fractures or pain down the outside edge of your foot. So, having not wanted under or overpronation, because both of those are rather unpleasant, what we're going to do is have a look at shoes. The clues in the shoes. I was very proud of that. There's a little collection of shoes here on the pictures, what we're going to look at. And these are some of the shoes that our runners give to us when they've finished with them, or when they've had a problem, we've taken the shoe off them and said throw that away. We always keep the shoes because we get to see genuine wear patterns. Some of these belong to just casual runners, some of these belong to, you know, elite professional runners. So I've got to do a screen share because I've got them on the iPad, and I'm going to talk you through what you can look for in your own shoes to tell you what's going on. And this is where you could all vanish if I get it wrong. I'm of that age where technology is not necessarily the most natural thing to me. Just opening Coach's eye. There's all our pictures. Right. I'm going to try and do a screen share. So you may vanish for a minute. Haha, we're there. Good. Okay, let me see if I can bring this up in size. Nope, that'll do. Okay, this pair of shoes does belong to an elite runner, basically. And I think this is important. When I say elite runner, I mean absolute national, top of their game. So even they don't get it right, even with the best coaching in the world, even turning out, you know, championship performances, things can go wrong. What I want you to see on this particular shoe is what's happening here and the difference in the two. One shoe is significantly more worn than the other, and that's fairly obvious. Now that could happen in any part of the shoe. Now everything else I'm going to talk about, and people do get clever with this, especially if they've read a book or they've had a go on the YouTube or internet or something like that. People will look at a shoe, even themselves, and they get a bit overcomplicated. Do I overpronate? Do I underpronate? What's that actually showing? Okay, if nothing else, the take-home message is when you look at your own shoes after this, if they are not evenly worn, don't worry if they're worn on the front, the back, the sides, whatever at the moment. The question is, are they evenly worn? If they look like this pair of shoes and they are not evenly worn, we have trouble. And the trouble we have is irrelevant as to whether it is under, overpronation. This person doesn't load their legs evenly. That's what's happened here. She loads one foot more than the other, and that is crucial. What we have to do is find out why, which is something a therapist has to do, unfortunately, and, you know, strengthen the feet if we can. So this set of shoes is worn unevenly. We're going to take these two circles away. That is the most important thing you can see. The other things I'd like you to look at in this shoe are basically, if we look at, for example, the heel, and we look at the heel, you can see that that is actually all relatively even. Okay, this person in this pair of shoes doesn't really heel strike. There's no wear in the back of the shoe. There's nothing really going on that's terribly exciting in the backs of the shoes. All the wear, if you look at it in this shoe, it's all in the front. So this person is very much striking on the ball of the foot, basically, and they bounce like a kangaroo when they run. Again, this is incredible. This is an absolutely elite, and this is an ultra marathon runner. They cover 150 miles like this. Mind you, they do get an awful lot of treatment, so there is a problem with that. Ooh. Okay, let me move on. Let me find another picture of, there you are, this pair of shoes. Now, if we go back to what I asked you to look at, these aren't too bad. Okay, I'll grant you, relatively similar wear in the toes, similar-ish in the heel, but on the top one, yeah, arrow went the wrong way, but on the top one, there's just a little more wear. Okay, now, that's not going to worry me too much, but it does say that this person is slightly uneven on their feet. But again, this pair are very worn in the toes. Interestingly, they're not that worn in the midfoot, but they are quite worn in the heels as well. So these are worn heels and toes. but they're relatively even. Okay, we can see that. We are unlikely to get absolute perfection. You're unlikely to run absolutely 100% balanced. There is not enough difference in wear left and right for this to worry me. The previous pair of shoes did worry me. This person is also running pretty neutrally. If you look at it, the edges of this shoe are pretty evenly worn, or rather, sorry, not worn. The wear is down through the middle. It's down through the middle with this shoe. So this is quite a neutral foot pattern. So that's a nice example of a neutral shoe, although this person, interestingly, doesn't seem to load their midfoot very much in this shoe. Let's get rid of that one. And let's remember, we just looked at that shoe, yeah, which is all worn out here and hardly anywhere on the heel at all. Then we looked at this shoe, which is worn on the heel and the toe and is worn fairly evenly. And now we're going to compare the two shoes. The reason I'm comparing the two shoes is you might notice they're the same size. And guess who they belong to? The same runner. This is the same lady, basically, in one pair of shoes. She gets all her shoes given to her sponsored. In this pair of shoes, she doesn't run evenly. In this pair of shoes, she does. So it's not always about whether your foot is the problem. It's not always about, is your hip, is your knee, is the pelvis the problem? Sometimes it's just the shoe. Now, bizarrely, for an elite runner, she's never had a shoe fitted in her life. She has hundreds of pairs of them because every manufacturer wants to give her a pair of shoes, and she puts them on and runs in them. So it's no wonder she ultimately came to us with an issue. She'd been running for years. She just happened to run in one particular pair she was given that just pushed her over the edge. So the message here very much is, when you find the right pair of shoes for you, when you find a pair of shoes that suit you, please try and stick with them. This is one of the problems I see a lot of. This lady actually bought, this is years ago now, she bought 10 pairs of shoes in, all of which were in current use, depending on what colour outfit she was wearing, which is quite important to some people. Psychologically, you know, people do like to wear certain things and have certain matching colours and whatever. But the shoes were influencing her. Now, she was terribly weak in the feet. Don't get me wrong, her feet were awful. So some shoes were supporting her well, like this blue pair. Some pairs like this pair here, which I've actually got them all here. Yeah, Brooks, basically. That's the actual shoe. This pair weren't supporting her at all, basically. And she never knew she had problems until this all came up. So try and stick with the same shoe if you can. It makes it easier also if somebody like me has to look at it. But if not, and we see something like this, we know that inherently you are quite unstable through your feet, your knees, your hips, or the shoe wouldn't influence you that much. Let me find the next one. Right, this is a beautiful example of absolutely, definitely, without doubt, this person must heel strike, because that is terribly worn out on the heel. And if you look at it, it's only worn, I don't want that, I want an arrow. It's only worn badly here, and it's worn here, and it's worn here. Look at this, tons of tread, tons of tread. That's the inside edge of the shoe. Look at the inside of the heel, quite a load of wearing. This person stays on the outside edge of their foot. This person is me. This is how my shoes wear. This is a classic overpronator. And look, we've still got bits of tread there, but absolutely nothing there at all. So if you're seeing a shoe that's all worn down the outside like this, this is a sign you're overpronating. I also heel strike. So anything Gina's told you today about midfoot strike being best, she's absolutely correct. But sometimes, and I'm going to summarize this at the end, sometimes you just can't get away from what you do. Some people like me who were taught to run, who were coached to run in the 80s, were taught to heel strike. It was actually thought to be the way to go, and it's ingrained in here. And I'll just go with shoe technology to get me around it. But I'm aware of the issues it causes, and I do get compartment syndromes, I do get shin splints, I do get calf and Achilles issues if I'm not very careful with my training. Okay, let's pull up another one, because next one should be, I hope, an under, is it neutral? Let's have a look. This shoe here, this belongs to a keen but casual runner, but he does a fair old bit of distance. He does some shorter ultras, sort of 50s, that sort of thing. This shoe's quite subtle. He is a little bit of an overpronator, but not enough for me to have worried about the problem he came in with. Now, he's worn on the heel, like a lot of people. He's a heel striker. And we can see that the tread on the outside of the shoe here is relatively intact, but on the inside, it is starting to wear. So he's overpronating a little bit, but nothing too bad. All these patterns we see on the bottom of shoes, by the way, are here for this purpose. Some bits are to disperse water, for tread, to grip, you know, this sort of thing here, or this chunky stuff. This is also help you grip. Some of the funny little patterns you get in shoes, the little hashes, the little decorations on the bottom, I don't know if we've got any that aren't so worn that they show. Actually, this pair, this is this lady's pair. Yeah, I'm going to flip back to it to show you something. This is a very mild overpronator, and we can see that just because it's worn on the inside. I'm going to zip back to this shoe. If I blow it up, we've got funny little patterns in the shoe. We've got little rings here. We've got crosses here. These have got nothing to do with grip. The grip's all coming from here and here. These little crosses and hashes and little patterns and these little lines here, they're actually to help us do exactly what we're doing now. It helps us read the wear. And you can see it here classically. The cross arrow, the cross is present, the cross is present, the cross is going away, the cross is gone, the cross is totally gone. So they're here to help us read wear. Manufacturers put it in there. Something else I should add while I'm on this picture. What we've got in this shoe is a second color showing through, where I just drew these arrows. The sole of the shoe is yellow, but white is now showing through. That tells us the shoe is worn out. If you want to know whether a shoe is worn out, there's many ways of telling. But when another color starts to show through, that is just like a car tire, it's just like a bicycle wheel, if you've got a decent one. This is a wear indicator. When a second color starts to show through, the shoe is towards the end of its life. Its shock absorption properties will be on the way out. So that's one way of telling. And actually, do you know, if I roll this forward, I might be able to show you something while I'm at it. These are the uppers of these shoes. They're not very healthy, especially when they've got something like a great big hole in the side. They are generally absolutely shot. You know, these are not in good condition at all. And if I keep rolling, if I put them onto their side, there's the hole that was in them. If you want to test if your shoe is worn out, apart from looking at the bottom, and apart from going with the general idea that anything around about 300 to 500 miles will wear a shoe out, that is not strictly true. This is why it's nice to check it. If you just press, if you squeeze, like I did there, if you squeeze that, if you squeeze the sole and you squeeze it all around, all we're looking for is, does it evenly compress throughout? When you check the shoe, or do you come across a soft spot? And a great way to do that is with your eyes shut. Just track down the side of the shoe with your eyes closed, feeling, 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 feeling. Your shoe should be the same firmness all the way through. And you may find you suddenly come across a point where it sinks in. It's hard on this shoe, but on some shoes as well, if they're particularly smooth and they're not textured here on the side of the sole, you'll see creases appearing as well. And if you see creases and kind of crush marks appearing, that's not good either. The other way of telling if you load one foot more than the other is to look inside the shoe, because all shoes will have a label. Yeah, you can't see it. All shoes will have a label on the inside. And if on one side it's more worn out than the other, that tells you you're favouring a foot as well. Right, moving on to something I think Gina has talked about. A true barefoot pair of shoes. A pair of shoes that allow your toes to splay that allow the bones in your feet to work, that are just there to stop you stepping on glass and tacks and hypodermic needles and all sorts of nonsense like that. If you have a look, if I really wave the shoe about, have a look at that. Have a look at these patterns on the bottom. Have a look at these little dots. Have a look at these little crosses. Have a look at these little honeycombs. Have a look at these little dots here. This shoe is actually pretty evenly worn all over. Yeah, there's no real points apart from a smidge on this shoe here on the outside where anything is particularly wearing out. And that is because the person wearing this shoe is actually running neutrally, and they're running in a barefoot style. They're doing a midfoot strike. So the whole of the foot is being loaded evenly. So actually these shoes, I can tell you, these shoes have about 1,000 miles on them of road. And look at that. Look what's left on the bottom. So when you're wearing out your plush, big, you know, I'll call them traditional running shoes. They're not traditional really, but you know, our current idea of running shoes, when you're wearing them out that quickly, especially one side more than the other, something's not right. Something's very heavy in your style. But if you heel strike, if you forefoot strike, you'll have a much heavier style of running anyway. But this is a great example of a pair of shoes that have done, these will never wear out. The only reason this person stopped wearing these shoes is their foot gradually got wider as they ran more and more and more barefoot, and they actually had to get a slightly bigger pair of shoes. They couldn't get into these anymore. And don't forget, for the whole of your life, your bone will remodel. If you put your bone under new stresses, it will remodel. So they were actually able to train their foot to these shoes. Now, they have got a little bit of wear here on the left. Not a lot. There is a bit. And like most people, yes, they are neutral, but they're not quite perfect. Look, we are getting a little bit of wearing out, but for 1,500 miles, that's pretty astounding. And ideally, your own shoes would look like that. This is a worn out pair of shoes. Funnily that. But look at this. This is, again, this is a classic. On the shoe on the bottom, there, that's wrong. On the shoe on the bottom, we have somewhere. And on the shoe on the top, we have an absolute ton of wear, basically. And then here in the toes, very worn out. So this person is also heavily coming into the big toe and coming off the big toe. So there's overpronation going here. Okay, the shoe is not worn evenly. This is a minimalist shoe. This is a barefoot shoe again. It just hasn't got the free toes. So this is a person who actually shouldn't really be in this pair of shoes. They're not ready for them yet. They haven't got the foot strength. They haven't got the foot strike. This person's forefoot striking. You can see it a mile off just in the shoes. So if you have been tempted to experiment with barefoot running or the barefoot shoes, yes, you have to transition to them slowly. You have to train yourself into them. But if you have a weakness in your feet, if you underpronate, if you overpronate, if you're a heel striker or you're a midfoot striker, you're going to find it very hard to go into a barefoot shoe. Having said that, the barefoot shoe may correct you because you weren't heel striking it much. This person did, however, manage to forefoot strike in theirs. So they would have been better off. This person would be better off in a pair of shoes, running shoes designed for forefoot striking with all the padding in the front. They're just not suited to this kind of shoe. And this can go hard on some people because they love the shoes they've got. They love the shoes they have. They don't want to give them up. It's very common. But sometimes you've got to go with what your body's telling you. Okay, we can have problems because this is a off-road pair of shoes. And the off-road pair of shoes don't have all these wonderful little hashes, all these wonderful little patterns. They don't have all the little dots and stars on them. So how are you supposed to read them? Yeah, if all you've got is a pair of, oh man, what am I thinking of? Innovates, Mud Claw or something, you're going to have ever such trouble reading them. Now, these are mine. These are my mountain marathon shoes, basically. And you can, to a degree, and I've told you that I underpronate, if we go in really deep, you can see that on the outside, these studs are much more worn down than on the outside. But it's very subtle, and you can see it here. They're flattening out a bit. They're still very sharp here, but very hard to read an off-road pair of shoes. However, this pair of shoes also happen to be worn out. I know that for various reasons. I know that because you'll like this. This is the best bit. Look at that. Basically, as soon as your upper starts coming away from the sole, even a little bit, okay, again, it's a sign that the shoe is either well past its life, or if it's happened really early on in a shoe, send it back and get your money back. But fundamentally, what will normally happen is you'll find it's breaking apart in one place only, and that will often guide you to which part of the foot you're overloading. I'm a heavy heel striker, I told you that. And funnily enough, this shoe is absolutely, and the toe box isn't too clever either, but that's just wear and tear and scree and things like that. But yeah, if you're an off-road runner, it's a lot harder to read your shoes, and you might have to go for trying to judge it through your feet and whether your big toe is across, whether you've got hard skin on your big toe, or whether you've got hard skin on the outside of your foot only. Or we'll look at it and tell you, whichever, plug. Now, here we go. Here's our final pair of shoes. This pair of shoes are the different way up to all the others. What this pair of shoes is showing us is a relatively neutral but heel strike. So we've got that wear on the heel. Where's my little circles? They're not working with circles. We've got some wear on the heel of these shoes, so we know the heel strike. But if we come down through the shoe, it is relatively even wear here and here, but it's all worn through the midfoot. It's all worn straight down the middle of the shoe. So there's nothing excessive on the edges. Nothing excessive on the edges. If it was excessive on the inside, it would be overpronation. If it was excessive on the outside, it would be underpronation. Okay, if I'm going to be fair, and again, I know who this person is because he gives the shoes. If we look really closely, we have on this shoe got a little more wear than we have on that shoe. So this person is very, very mildly overpronating in this shoe, in that foot. But it is mild. If you look at the shoe as a whole, it's a nice wear pattern, largely down the middle, coming straight off the toes, and even the heels are fairly evenly worn in terms of their wear. Okay, so do you heel strike? Do you forefoot strike? I'll cough after each one, shall I? Do you midfoot strike? Do you underpronate? Do you overpronate? Okay, you can tell these things by starting to look at your shoes. Also by getting friends to look at you when they run. They may say, yeah, actually it's weird, you run on the outside on one foot, or I can see you turning in on the other. Do we alter the gait? And how do you alter the gait? What do you do? Well, the biggest question is, should you? Should you alter your gait? Because if you identify you have a problem, trying to alter your gait can bring problems of its own. Basically, if you're very used to running in a certain way and it is not giving you pain, if you're not having a problem, there is an argument, which as with any argument, you have to balance up as to whether or not you should even bother to try and change. Now, I'm never, ever going to bother to try and change to a midfoot strike. I also know that I'm never going to put a neutral foot placement because my leg shape won't allow it. So I, for the rest of my life, will be a heel striker who underpronates. That's fine. I can buy a shoe to deal with that. And do you know what? I might wear them out. I might go through them a bit quickly, but that's what I'm going to need to do. Do you overpronate? Do you forefoot strike? You know, or do you heavily heel strike? Yes, maybe you do, but you have no problems. You've never had shin splints. You've never had compartment syndromes. You've never had anything like that. Why should you change? Well, not necessarily. Just make sure you get the right pair of shoes for the job. But if you're relatively early on into your running career and you've got these problems, actually, it's not a bad idea to start seeing if you can alter what you do. Now, if you're under or overpronating because you're weak in the foot, that will change naturally. If you choose to strengthen your foot with the exercises with the towel that Gina showed you, then actually you will go from overpronating to neutral anyway. So that's fine. The rest of your body will change at the same time. Everything will adapt together. That's a good idea. If you heel strike, it's easy to experiment with midfoot strike because you can easily midfoot strike in a normal running shoe. All you do is shorten your stride up. That leg should come down under you, not out in front of you. And there's a lot of, those who've been running long enough will have seen us go from a long open stride, which is why we built up the back of the shoe in the first place, to what we've now got, which is a high cadence and a much shorter stride length. It is better for the body. It does use the mechanics and Newton's third law better to use a high turnover rate. But yes, you can try and shorten up your stride to create a midfoot strike. You've got a big fluffy shoe on if you're already wearing one. Nothing's going to go wrong with that, apart from the fact it will feel a little bit odd when you do it. There'll be nothing more than that to it. If you strike on the ball of the foot, again, there's no reason why you shouldn't try and basically do the opposite. You might have to lengthen out your stride a little, or you might find that you just don't pick your toes up, basically. People who are heel striking tend to pick their toes up too much and the heel comes down. People who forefoot strike tend to almost leave their foot down as it travels through the air. So sometimes just getting somebody to film you, even on your iPhone, because you can still slow it down on your own iPhone. You can have a look at what you do. But just have a think. My recommendation to people who come in for a gait analysis, who haven't got pain, they just want a gait analysis. Depending what we find, sometimes I will say to them, look, you're running really well, you're doing PBs, you've got big races coming up, you're not injured, you're just showing me a certain way of running. What I will do is their style of running, let's say they overpronate, I would then check all the areas that could be injured by overpronation, make a note of them, just like the dentist when they check your teeth initially. And then I'd bring them back 6 months down the line and I'd see if those parameters had changed. And if I could see that we were starting to head for problems with the hips, knees, whatever, then I might say to them, do you know, it might be worth trying to change your gait because you're heading ultimately for injury. So that's one way you can work on should you change it or not. Okay, if you have got overpronation though, and you decide you're going to strengthen, you do your foot strength, as Gina told you or showed you, and your tibialis posterior you can strengthen as well. That you'll strengthen largely by doing up and down on your toes, or pushing a band away, or going into the gym and doing a press with a leg press with just the foot, or you can get on a Bosu, or you can get on a wobble cushion, or you can do anything like that. If you go on the outside, as I do, well, again, you could have a very weak foot. So I would try strengthening your foot, because you're not going to go further on your outside if you strengthen your foot, but it may turn out that you overpronate, and that's why you overcompensate. It's the peroneals, the muscles down the outside edge of the leg, that will get very tight, as will a muscle called tibialis anterior, which can give you compartment syndrome. You can train your peroneals. All you would do is get one of these bands. I'll put it around my foot. That's my big toe, and that's my little toe on my side, and I just twist my foot outwards that way against the band. And as we've already said, if you want to try and get to a midfoot strike, just shorten your stride up a little bit. You will need some help with it. You'll need a friend to look at it really and tell you what you're doing, or film it. And try to get the foot right down under the hips. The biggest issue you've got here is if you are a habitual heel foot striker, all the research shows, and the research that I believe, that if you decide you want to midfoot strike in a built-up shoe that's not designed, that's designed for heel striking more, you will, if you don't concentrate on it, ultimately go back to heel striking. Okay, if you put a barefoot shoe on, you won't go back to heel striking because you can't, because it hurts. But you can't go into a barefoot shoe if you're already doing any of these problems and don't want to correct them. It's a bit of a minefield, and I could risk making it too complicated and going the other way now. These shoes, by the way, I'm going to ask anybody to look at me. Did Gina tell you how we got to this kind of shoe in the first place? Somebody nod or shake their head. No, okay, cool. Little story for you. Okay, back in the days of Mr. Bannister and everybody else, and right up to the 60s, everybody ran in what, in my part of the world, in Bristol, we called DAPs, or plimsolls, or just flat shoes, or track spikes, which was still a completely flat shoe, just with some spikes in the front, so that as you clawed your foot back, you drove forward. And then, in the kind of 60s, 70s, they started to get this idea that if you could do a wider stride, it would be a more efficient way of running because you cover more distance for each leg movement. But funnily enough, they found if you tried to do a wider stride, you hurt your heel. So some clever chap at Nike, and these aren't Nikes, these are Brooks, but some clever chap at Nike decided, oh, let's put a big wedge of foam in the heel to allow people and encourage people to heel strike. And that's how we ended up with these shoes we have today. Now, in fairness, Nike were also the first people to realise that suddenly, a few years down the line, there was a prevalence of shin splints and knee problems and hip problems and back problems, which when they went back and talked to people like Chris Brasher and Roger Bannister, and they all said, no, we never had any of that. These are all new phenomenon. This is when we started to originally work out heel strike was a problem, and most people were heel striking because it was believed to be the way to run, and they were being coached to run this way, and they were given a shoe that allowed them to run this way, and it has become the norm for a lot of people. Nike were also the first people to try and undo it. And roughly every 5 years of my career, Nike have come up with some kind of minimalist shoe to try and get people running more naturally. And it's always fallen flat on its face. It finally worked when Vibrams came up with 5 fingers, because every manufacturer now makes a barefoot shoe or a minimalist shoe. So you do now have a choice. But I think this kind of shoe is here to stay forever. I'm glad it's here to stay forever because it allows people like me to run, basically, with the problems that I have. And it allows somebody who's been running a long time to run, as long as they're aware of the problems that their way of running can cause and can train around them. But fundamentally, yeah, we actually invented a problematic shoe. Now, a lot of the problems have gone because the shoes have become re-engineered to get around those problems. But a lot of people rely on their shoe to run. They absolutely rely on it. And that's fine, but bear in mind, if you're relying on a motion control shoe, if you're relying on a heel striking shoe, if you're relying on a forefoot striking shoe, it will wear out. And as it wears out, its properties that are protecting you will get less. And for a lot of people, that's just as the mileage is going up, really. So you will tend to go through your shoes quite fast. And sometimes your problems are as simple as you need a new shoe. Manufacturers say anything from 300 to 600 miles. These got 300 miles on them. They're absolutely destroyed. But then this lady runs, an awful lot. Don't matter, she didn't pay for them. However, what you can't do is let a shoe get to this state and then just go into a new one, because you go from a shoe that has been giving you the corrective properties, which have gradually worn out and gone away, and you go into a shoe which has got all its torsion bars or gas systems or whatever intact, and it makes you run in a different way, just like this lady, basically. So what we should really be looking at is when your shoe starts to look like it's wearing out, or when you reach your 300 or 400 miles, you've hopefully bought the same shoe again, you should actually start transitioning them over. And your recovery runs, your shorter runs, you do in the new shoe. Your longer runs, you do in your original shoe, and then you slowly change that. And over the period of a couple of months, you should slowly change into the other shoe. One of the biggest problems I see all the time, and it's the first question I ask anybody if they've got a running problem and they haven't had one before: have you changed your shoes? 99% of the time they say, yeah, really good pair, had an analysis down the shop, had everything, brilliant shoe, was really well recommended in Runner's World, but it's not right for them. Basically, when you find one that works, use it. Oh, I'm getting on my soapbox now. Let me summarize everything that's been said today. A mid-foot strike is natural and it is preferable, but it's not necessarily achievable, either because you're like me or because you just got into the habit that you're never going to break. In which case, shoes are available to go with your problems, but be aware of what that problem is. Be aware of what your running style is. Be aware, please, that when you go into a shop and that they do a gait analysis, what they're actually doing is an ankle foot analysis. They're not interested, and they're not trained to see what's happening in the knees, the hips, the shoulders, or anything above. They're just looking at how your ankle and foot relate, because it helps them decide whether you need an underpronation or an overpronation shoe. They won't even often look at it from a heel or forefoot point of view. So it's just a way of getting the right shoe for you. But I always say, in an ideal world, running shops will sell neutral shoes. You'd go in, you say, I want to start running, please. They put you on their treadmill, they go, crikey, you overpronate badly, go and get that sorted out and we'll sell you a shoe in 3 months. What they actually say is, crikey, that's awful. If you run like that, you're going to really hurt your knees. But don't worry, we've got a pair of shoes that will allow you to run like that. And that kind of sits a little bit badly with me, in the sense that if you repackage that, as I just did, what you're actually saying is, do you know, I can't give you a normal shoe to run. Your body isn't up to it. So I'll give you a special shoe that will allow you to run. But by the way, it will wear out. So just bear that in mind. Under and overpronation can create issues, no matter what you read, what you hear, what is told. You know, yes, I am a scientist, and therefore I know what 1A evidence is, and we have to work on it, but I also know the limitations of research. And I will take 30 years of seeing people under and overpronate, and hundreds of people walking through the door with problems we get rid of straight away over someone who's done a 3-month study. I don't care if it's a PhD. You know, it does affect you. Clues are in the shoes. I love that. That's what. And the biggie, if nothing else, please just look out for that uneven loading. If you are not loading evenly, we've got to find out why. And honestly, it could be anything. I had one chap come to me. He was wanting to do the London Marathon. He deferred it twice already, because every year he tried to train, he got stress fractures. It was his final attempt. It was January. He'd just come back from another set of stress fractures in his left tibia, and he was determined to do it. And I'll cut a long story short, we got him to it, but I wasn't terribly happy about it. But when I watched him run as a whole, not in the shop, as a whole, he ran with his head over to one side like this. He actually ran all the time like that, and that made him load his left side, which showed in his shoes. And the reason he ran with his head over to the left side is he had to hold his head to the left all day at work. Yeah, simple as that. Now, I'm told that if you hit your space bar, it will bring your mic back. And I'd like you to bring your mic back, because if anybody's got any questions, I will spend the next 10, 15 minutes answering them.
Hi, could I ask, in terms of off-road and on-road running, which one is best then?
In general, off-road is more forgiving. It's more, there's more variety. When you run on the road, you have this constant foot placement, strike after strike after strike after strike. And if you've got a little problem, that joint or the muscle or whatever it is going ouch, 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 ouch. When you run off-road, because every step is virtually different, sometimes it'll be loaded incorrectly, sometimes it won't. So generally, off-road running, much better for you, much more forgiving. It's one of the reasons I got into kind of mountain marathons, basically. That kind of terrain, I don't get any problems with shin splints, with compartment syndromes, anything like that. Any long road runs, forget it. Forget it.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Sorry. Yeah, you talk about the uneven loading. Looking at the bottom of my shoes, it looks pretty clear. I push off harder on one foot than the other, and that the front of the toe is more worn on the I think on the right hand side.
Yes.
But that doesn't show all the way down the foot. It really is just the toe that seems overworn. How do you go about trying to fix that?
Right. The question with that is, what do your feet look like? Because what that normally indicates is that on the foot, the side that isn't so worn, is that you're not actually rolling all the way through on the foot. It often indicates that you're getting off the less worn shoe early. And that's often because the foot is weak and it can't take the full loading cycle.
Right.
So it's normally, it's funny, that's a reverse one. Normally, not always, normally it's indicative that the opposite shoe is the problem foot.
So the one that's not wearing is weaker?
Yes, that is the normal case. Not every single time, but most of the time that is the case, when you see that worn right up through the toe on one and not on the other. The other possibility is that you are weak in the foot that it's worn on. And actually, instead of loading the toes evenly as you come off, you're just trying to get off onto one side. But is that wear on the toe bit right down the middle?
No, it's slightly on the outside.
Yeah, it might be.
Actually, you can probably see them though.
Hold them up a bit more. Oh gosh. Yeah. Okay, that suggests to me that you don't want to load your big toe as you push off. It'd be interesting. I guess, if you've got shoes on at the moment.
No.
Have you got socks on?
Yes.
Pop them off. We don't need to look at your feet, but I need you to look at your feet. I want you to tell me if one toe is pushed across the big toe.
The left toe slightly pushes across further than the right one. It's not a huge amount. I mean, they look fairly straight, but just marginally it points inwards.
Yeah, and it was the left shoe that had the wear on the outside edge, wasn't it, on the toe?
No, the left one is the one that doesn't have the wear on.
Is it? Hold them up again.
So the bent toe is the one with the least wear on it.
Yes, and that's what I'm looking at. I'm seeing that bit of tread left on the front.
Yeah.
On the left foot. That's you not loading all 5 toes evenly.
Right.
That's you trying to avoid loading the big toe.
Okay.
Now, you could be, I don't suppose you've heard it in the past, have you?
No.
No. There's a fair chance that you are weak in the left foot.
Right.
And that as you come to load the big toe, which is really important to push off, central nervous system wise, you go, oh, no.
So how do you fix it? I mean, try to do strengthening exercises on your left foot, or is it a lost cause?
You know, Gina showed you the towel thing.
Yeah.
All right. If you actually try that, if everybody tries this, not now, but if everybody gets a towel, puts it down on the bathroom floor, puts one foot on it and pulls it, and kind of judge how easy it is, and then put your other foot on and pull it. If you have got a weaker foot, it's going to be obvious because you go, my goodness, I can hardly move the towel, or it won't be as convincing, basically. And it wouldn't surprise me if you did that and found out that your left foot cannot pull that towel like the right foot can. If that's the case, get pulling the towel.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Yeah, you're welcome. Cool. Has anybody else? We've got 18 people here, I think. Has anybody else got any questions? Someone else must have a question.
Could I just ask about Achilles injuries?
Oh, please do.
I'm assuming the foot strengthening exercises that you've described are going to help generally increase the strength in your foot. But is there anything else particularly you can recommend for Achilles injuries?
Yeah, is it an Achilles injury that is chronic? Did you actually pull it, or is this something that's kind of come on?
It's just come on really with more running.
Achilles injuries come on slowly for one of 2 reasons. The common, you've already identified in a way, is weakness in the foot. I don't know quite what Gina covered, but if the forefoot and the midfoot can't splay and the arch can't be there to stabilize the whole foot when it wants to rotate in or out, the next thing you will control it with is the calf, the soleus, the Achilles tendon. You can actually control through the heel. That's what a podiatrist would do. If they built an insole, they would build it to control through the heel, basically. So often Achilles tendonitis that comes on quietly is indicative that the calf is wildly overworking, usually to make up for a lack of foot strength. The other reason it could be wildly overworking, is it one side or both?
I've actually had it in both, unfortunately, one and then the other.
Oh, crikey. Yeah, okay. Sometimes you'll favour one foot over the other, therefore the calf will have to work harder anyway and it'll get sore, and then you'll favour the other side and it'll get sore, and it goes back and forth and back and forth. Anyway, your question, the answer is, A, check the strength in the feet as we just discussed with the towel, and if it is lacking, get strengthening. B, for an Achilles tendon, it's a very, very good exercise you can do, very heavily researched as well. You go up on your toes, and then you come back down slowly over a count of 5. So you'd go up, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I'd go up on my toes, but then come down slowly, an eccentric action. It has an action on the tendon that creates a healing effect. However, there's a little caveat to it. I don't just go up on my toes. I have to help myself up there. I don't really want to load the calf until I'm at the top of the movement. So the way I normally do that is I put my hands on a table or a work surface in front of me, and I'd lean into it and push up with my arms to get me up onto my toes. And then as I take my hands away, I load the muscle for the first time up on my toes, and then I get this gradual lengthening effect. You do that for 10 repetitions, once a day. That's it. And afterwards, one of the best things you can do is then either pop some ice on it for 10 minutes or, you know, an anti-inflammatory cream or something like that. Have you come across that exercise?
Yes, I've seen that, but I think you're right. It's taking the weight off the feet before you come down. That's what I need to probably do. Yeah,
if you actually just go up on your toes automatically, so if you're doing a calf raise, it completely negates the exercise. You've got to sort of fall into a table or fall into a work surface and get up there that way. That's the trick to it. Or if it is on one side, do you know what? You can always go up on the other leg and then transfer over at the risk of making your calf tight on the other side.
Okay. All right. That's great. Thanks very much.
Oh, thank you. No problem. What I got 5 minutes. If anybody wants to ask me anything else.
Both my shoes that I'm running with, left heel is worn.
Yeah.
So can you see those both?
Okay. Yeah, is that the heel? Is that the inside of the heel?
No, sorry, these are left ones. So they're both the outside.
Sorry. Okay, yeah.
So my right one's okay.
Mm-hmm.
So am I compensating something, pushing on my left one more than my right one?
Something, yeah. And again, do you know what? It usually comes down to one of two things. Either the one that is apparently good is the problem because you're just not loading it for a full cycle.
Right.
You're pushing off it early. So, and we see this when we analyze people a lot. When you look at the rest of the body, you notice they actually slightly lunge almost onto the shoe that's overworn. And because of the way you naturally land on the outside of your foot, doesn't matter whether it's, you know, if you heel strike, you will land on the outside edge. It's normal. And then you'll pronate into mid and then come off. So that will be exaggerated. But it can also be there if you are weak in that same foot, because you will land excessively on the outside edge of your heel to try and avoid a sudden massive load of the arch. So again, this is the beautiful thing about this. At its base level, it's quite simple. Check the strength in your feet. Use the towel trick to check the strength and see which one is weak. One of them's going to be weak. Almost guaranteed one of them's going to be weak. We see this day in, day out, time and time again. And often the shoe showing the problem is the leg that's compensating.
Yes, yeah.
Not the leg that's the problem. So have a look and see what happens. I mean, to be honest, if anybody's trying any of this and they don't know what to make of it, you know, you can just email us. Just private message us or something and say, yeah, I came to the webinar and I've had a look, you know, what does this mean? You know, can you tell us about looking at it?
What is your view on orthotics?
Oh, I like that one. Right, okay. My view on orthotics is they are useful as a way of getting somebody temporarily sorted out when they're in trouble. So for someone like me, I could have an orthotic made up that stopped me underpronating, but I choose not to because I've trained my way around it. Most people have got an orthotic because they overpronate. Most people who overpronate can retrain the strength in the foot. Now, for years and years and years and years and years, podiatrists worked with support. It's what the profession was. You saw weakness in the foot, and you know, although they're very, very good and experts in lower limb biomechanics, the solution was always to support. That's been changing in the last few years. And most podiatrists now, most really modern up-to-date podiatrists will use a combination of strengthening in the way we're talking about, and sometimes an insole just to get the problem off the ankle, the knee, the hip, the back, whatever's going on in the short term, with the ultimate aim of bringing you back out of the orthotic. So if we're going to come right up to date, the days of orthotics for life should have gone. It should be trying to re-strengthen the foot so you eventually don't need the orthotic. The problem with the orthotic, and the reason the world has finally gone this way, is twofold. If my foot is weak, and let's just use overpronation as the classic example, if my foot is weak and I put support in it, it's the same as putting my arm in a sling or my leg in a plaster. The muscles will waste, the muscles have become weak. Okay, now that's not a problem whilst the support is in the shoe. It is a problem when you go on holiday, go for a 5-mile walk down the lovely sandy beach without your shoe with the support in, with a foot that is now weaker than ever, and come back from that holiday in agony, which is what we often see. The other problem with the orthotic is it very often limits the type of shoes you can wear. Basically, there's a lot of running shoes you can't get an orthotic into, depending on how the orthotic was made. And there's a lot of orthotics aren't made for running shoes. They're stiff, they're solid, they're not made to flex at all. So sometimes you need several pairs of orthotics, one for sport, one for normal everyday use, and that can add up to 1,000. Basically, when someone comes in, we look at why is the foot doing what it's doing and can it be corrected? We start by trying to correct it. Most correction will start to show within 2 weeks. If we are not seeing correction and the person is still suffering, then yes, I may well fit them with a temporary orthotic, a moldable one. They're not too expensive. We can get those for about £25 or so. We can mold it with a hairdryer. We can send them off in that. They go, God, I feel so much better. My knee doesn't hurt anymore. My back doesn't hurt anymore. My ankle doesn't hurt anymore. And we can then slowly strengthen and strengthen and strengthen. And I can remold the orthotic as they go. I can remold it to offer less and less and less support each time as the strength goes up, basically. So yeah, orthotics are what I call Diet Coke. They are part of a calorie-controlled diet. They're not the way you're going to, Diet Coke isn't going to make you lose weight. It's part of a calorie-controlled diet. Orthotics are the same, really. They shouldn't be the total answer unless you have a foot injury or a condition that means you have no other choice. This should be part of a whole system. And I'll actually, while we're on, I'll just plug Kenilworth Foot Care, because Kenilworth Foot Care are one of the people we tend to refer to and refer back the other way quite a lot, because all the podiatrists there are very much into that, actively trying to re-strengthen the foot and get it working properly. They're not down the pure orthotic route. But yeah, that's my view on orthotics.
2 feet that do 2 different things. I've got bunions on both.
Yep.
I historically ran marathons painfully, and I always used to get blisters on the medial side all the way through the arch and around the big toe. And I get a hard skin on the medial side, nothing on the outside. Although I think I actually use the outside of my foot. Specifically on the left. And I get left hip problem, left SI problem, but right adductor groin problem.
Yeah, classic. We love people like you.
So I seem to swivel on my left.
Yes.
And control it with my right, I think.
Oh, man. That's the kind of thing you'd watch. There's all sorts going on. But what I can tell you is your feet are weak.
Yes, they are very. I can't go over my left. I can't toe off very well.
No. You could try this towel strengthening. Basically, you clearly, the overpronation is a funny one. Ultimately, you overpronate, but it might not show.
No,
you might compensate by trying to get the outside edge, but the fact you've got blisters down the inside, the fact you've got bunions, the fact you get the hard skin there tells us that's where the forces are going, even if you're managing to then suddenly
shift over.
Actually, that trying to negate them, that trying to compensate is what starts to throw in these other things you're telling me about. You've got to start trying to control the weird rotations that are occurring through your legs now. You've got to start controlling with the hips. And that means you're going to use the glutes, you're going to use the hamstrings, you're going to use the adductors, the abductors, the hip flexors. You're going to use everything to try and sort this out. So you are going to get all these kind of upper leg problems that go with it. And that would be the starting point. The starting point in nearly all these cases is the feet, really. And one thing you can do that's quite interesting is you could sometimes, you get people come in and they're not buying it. They're not, no, that can't be it. It must be more to it than that. Sometimes I will just do, and you can look it up on the internet anyway. If you looked at the pattern with rock tape or kinesia tape, whatever, for taping through the bottom of the foot for plantar fasciitis, so weakness, effectively, I'll sometimes just pop a load of rock tape on them and go on then, go for a run. And they come and go, that's amazing. Nothing hurt. I'm like, yeah, now go and exercise your feet. oh, can't I just use the rock? There's danger with that is, can't I just use the rock tape? I'm like, well,
Yeah.
you'll keep rock taking business for the next 30 years then. So if nothing else, you could actually, it's a pattern that you can't go wrong with. You know, you could look up that kind of foot support, arch support, plantar fasciitis, kinesio taping pattern, get a bit of kinesio tape, try it and see what it changes when you run. And I'll sometimes use that diagnostically as well, because somebody's perhaps showing a pain here, a pain there, how do they compensate, whatever. I'll sometimes mess about with tape or supports and then send them for a run during that session, then bring them back and go, okay, hang on, yes. That's the key point here. When we put a lift in there or when we strapped in there, all those pains went away. This is what we need to focus on. So that's something you could start experimenting with.
Okay.
If you wanted to, but yeah, how you're surmising it is largely correct. Whether it's exactly correct in terms of, am I twisting with this one and rotating with this one, is hard to know without physically seeing it. But
Sure.
if you're starting in your feet, that's for sure. You know, unless you've got a habit of buying horrifically bad fitting running shoes, which you won't.
I've gone through a fair few.
Yeah. And people who finish marathons, people who finish longer runs and say, oh, the state of my feet. It's funny, it's the world we live in. Oh yeah, well, I've just run 26 miles. Really? Your feet should look like those barefoot shoes we showed you.
Mm-hmm.
You shouldn't have blisters. You shouldn't have pain. You shouldn't have uneven hard skin. Your feet should be in a lovely state. And people naturally go, yeah, but I run a lot. You're like, yeah, but that's what your foot's designed to do. That's what your leg's designed to do. That's what your body's designed to do.
Mm-hmm.
If it's not able to do it, something's wrong. So yeah, I understand that's semi-useful, but a bit vague in places. But that's about as accurate as I can get it.
Yeah, and I know.
Oh.
I know my patella's maltracking, so I'm getting loads of knee problems at the moment as well. I've given up, to be honest.
Thought you'd start at the feet.
Yeah.
Sort the feet out. Get them strengthened. Get them behaving normally. Do that, because all the time a foot misbehaves, you've got to compensate through the hip. And if because you're compensating through the hip, you're using all the hip muscles, all the big ones, the hamstrings, the glutes, the adductors, they all cross the knee. So they will all influence the tracking of the patella. And this is one of the biggest places, actually, where the therapy element of my profession falls down. Basically, they see a mole-tracking patella and they go, oh, a mole-tracking patella. They don't go, why is it mole-tracking? They just go, oh, mole-tracking patella. I'll give you an exercise for that or a tape for that. I almost swore then. I was going to say, disastrous. You've got to establish the cause. You can't just try and correct it. You can't just tape it up. You can't just give them some inarranged static quads or something to make it fire correctly, because actually you're just going to make it fire even more incorrectly. So you've got to chase it through the system. But everything you're telling me, real classic stuff that usually, honestly, it's nearly always stems from the feet. And you've got to start with the feet, even if you put some insoles in.
I've tried insoles and they make it worse, because I don't think I need pronating insoles. I almost need propping up the other side to force me into pronation.
Get some strength in your feet. Yeah, definitely test your feet out. Test your feet out with that towel thing. I don't know if Gina mentioned it. The other thing you can do is you can stand in front of a mirror and just balance on one leg.
Yeah.
Your feet are both pointing forward, because some people turn one out. Just look at yourself, just balance on one leg. Forget what your body's doing. Watch what your foot's doing. If one foot does this, and the other foot does this, you know.
Do that again. What is foot doing?
It's just a generic thing. But let's say one foot kind of just does that, and you find yourself just rocking left to right fairly evenly, which is normal. But the other foot is just going, oh, or ah.
Oh, yeah.
Tells you everything you need to know. And bear in mind, you're static. You're standing on one leg. You're not putting any increased body weight through, and your foot can't even stabilize itself. What the hell is it going to do when you run?
Mm-hmm.
So that's a really good test. Just stand in front of the mirror, balance on one leg. The other thing you might see while I'm talking about it is I know you can't see my whole body, but if I balance on one leg, I'm balancing on one leg now. Nothing.
Right.
You might see yourself do this.
Oh yeah, I do that.
And if you lean over on one leg, you are desperately trying to unload the arch. Even if you don't visually overpronate, mechanically, you know, your brain, everything is saying, don't load that arch, don't load that arch. So when you do balance on one leg like yourself, also be aware of how much do I lean off. There will be a weight transfer, and a weight transfer is this. Of course there's a weight transfer, but my body stays upright. It's not that.
Got
That's
you.
what you need to watch.
Yeah, brilliant.
Okay, cool.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'd love to take more questions if I could, but we're pretty much out of time. So, hey, thank you everybody for coming along. We've raised some money for Waverley Day Centre, which is fantastic.